I've been concerned about the Lucy Letby trial from the time during the trial when I heard something that bothered me, and that was the police accusation that she'd written in her diary that she was a terrible person, and they were using this as a means of confession, when I saw it straight away as the sort of thing that somebody might write when they felt they hadn't done enough. That was the start of my doubts about the accusations levelled against Lucy Letby. I'm Granniopteryx. I'm on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with the case, Miss Letby was convicted in April 2023 of having killed 7 babies who were in the neonatal unit of the Countess of Chester Hospital. She was a nurse and charged with looking after them. The evidence the police presented to the court was some notes she had written to herself on the instructions of a counsellor, because she felt so bad about what was going on in the neonatal unit. That is, not just the babies that she was supposed to have killed, but the whole stress and strain of working in that unit. The unit was not run well, and there were several things wrong with it, including problems with the drainage and the sewage. So, Miss Letby was, as a nurse, under constant pressure. And she took it probably more it looks like she took it more personally than many nurses would. On a green post-it note was written, "I don't deserve to live. I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough to care for them. I'm a horrible, evil person. I am evil. I did this." She was told to write these notes to herself by her counsellor because she was having such trouble dealing with the cycle of death that was prevalent in that hospital. So I don't regard this as a confession, personally. I regard this as the words of somebody who's in serious psychological difficulties. I'm not saying that also proves she's innocent. It doesn't. But the trial was 8 months long, and there was a lot of evidence to which I am not privy. Okay, but I was rather disturbed by what was quoted in these notes being given as evidence by the police. Yeah, you will know from many of my videos that I don't trust the police. And if they get their fangs into somebody, they will do all sorts to prove their theory rather than to prove innocence or guilt. I thought this was an unfair piece of evidence. Of course, that doesn't mean to say it shouldn't have been presented. And then a little while ago, that is in May 2014, I read this article, and since then I've been thinking about it. I haven't made a video about it because of this. Just look at the length of it. Right, there's no way I could distill that into a 10 or even a 20-minute video. And I think that Rachel Aviv, who wrote the article for the New Yorker, did an absolutely amazing job of distilling 8 months of the trial into this article. But she said the upshot of it is that it's not a safe, none of the verdicts was safe. Then people started to think about this case. And in July of 2024, there was this article in The Guardian, written by Felicity Lawrence, and quoting Professor John Ashton, a former public health director. He had blown the whistle on a cluster of baby and maternal deaths at the Morecambe Bay hospitals when he was regional director of public health for the northwest of England. So he knew about this sort of thing already. His direct experience is that human instinct drives people to look for someone or something to blame, but the root causes are often more complicated and numerous. You don't need a serial killer to account for what happened at Chester, he said. Disasters, and this was a disaster, generally happen as a result of the convergence of a number of factors. We're talking in Chester about system failure. It was a hospital that was not well run, that had ambitions beyond its capability, that had problems with clinical governance and environmental problems. He added, the arguments about Lucy Letby herself boil down to the fact that circumstantial evidence and statistical and expert witness evidence that I believe was seriously flawed were presented to the court. That was in July, and then in September, Peter Hitchens wrote an article also about the Letby trial. Even Horace Rumpole could not have secured an acquittal for Lucy Letby, he says. The more I look at this case, the more I suspect there could never have been any other outcome than a conviction. I think a great cloud of emotion hung over that courtroom during the whole trial. I think that cloud spread outwards into the public mind before and during the long months of the trial. In my view, the actual prosecution of Miss Letby began on Thursday, the 5th of July, 2018, 2 days after she was arrested for the first time and more than 4 years before she finally sat in the dock. This whole case is why nobody will ever convince me that that this country should have a death penalty. Lucy Letby was convicted, but frankly, there's plenty of doubt about whether she is actually guilty. They skewed the statistics. For instance, they showed a chart showing she was on duty when all these babies died. They didn't show the chart that showed other nurses being on duty when other babies died, or when those babies died as well. Now, what has convinced me to mention this now, despite the fact that the whole thing is long and complicated, and all you can really say is there is serious doubt about this, is an article in the Daily Telegraph, which I can see now I've lost. So I'm going to cut here while I find it again. Right, got it. This is the article. I changed my mind on baby death, said a doctor who was part of the evidence, who contributed his evidence to the prosecution. The doctor says baby C, this is one of the babies, was not killed by injection of air into the stomach, but insists the jailed nurse did murder the baby. And this is what happened. During the trial, Dr. Evans said he thought a bubble of air had caused the baby boy's stomach to balloon, splintering his diaphragm and crushing his lungs so that he could no longer breathe. He was initially suspicious about the death because an X-ray showed the baby had an unusual amount of air in his stomach, which could have been caused by the deliberate pumping of air into his feeding tube. So you hear that and you think, well, yeah, he's a doctor, he knows what he's saying, and it's quite obvious that he knows what he's talking about here. However, a BBC File on 4 investigation broadcast yesterday, so that's a couple of days ago, found that Letby was not working at the hospital when the X-ray was taken. So the X-ray that Dr. Evans saw that shaped his opinion that the child had been murdered by introducing a bubble of air into the baby's stomach, that evidence was based on an X-ray that had been taken 2 days before, because Letby hadn't been in the hospital for 2 days before the baby had died. So the Telegraph asked Dr. Evans about this. The stomach bubble was not responsible for his death, he said, which is sort of obvious because that stomach bubble picture was from an X-ray that was several days old. It probably destabilised him, though. Well, yeah. His demise occurred the following day around midnight due to air in the bloodstream. So now he's changed his opinion. Letby was there. I amended my opinion after hearing the evidence from the local nurses and doctors. Baby C was always the most difficult from a clinical point of view, so I understand the confusion. So basically what Dr. Evans has said is like what the old witch finders used to say. Well, she doesn't have the witch spots, but she's guilty anyway, somewhere along the line. That's basically it. Now, whether Letby did introduce air into the child's bloodstream or not is immaterial here. The doctor says he was the child died because of air in his bloodstream, but he hasn't looked at any sort of autopsy report. And the evidence he gave was based on an X-ray which predates the baby's death by a couple of days. At least a couple of days. So his evidence, everything he said, is not valid. During the trial, Ben Myers KC, defending, said she had not been on shift when the X-ray was taken. But in summing up, Mr. Justice Goss did not remind the jury Letby had not been present on that date. What the judge said, well, apparently, that the radiologist's evidence showed the baby's stomach was full of gas, which could have been the result of deliberate administration of air. That's all he reminded them of. So, in my opinion, at least in that particular case, baby C, Letby could not be found guilty beyond reasonable doubt. And finding Dr. Evans saying, oh yeah, well the X-ray was taken a couple of days before that when Letby wasn't there, but she's guilty anyway. And you wonder about the rest of the verdicts. The fact is that the hospital was in a state of chaos, and Letby might have been over serious about her job and trying to keep babies alive who might have been kept alive by better care, but certainly through no fault of her own. That seems to have been at least a reasonable conclusion we can reach. Speaking about the new suggestion that baby C was actually killed by air in his bloodstream, Mark MacDonald, Letby's new barrister, said, "It's remarkable that out of nowhere we've got this new hypothesis. This was never there beforehand, it just came out of thin blue air. There is no evidence of anyone seeing it happen, no evidence from a diagnostic perspective, and no evidence in relation to what line the air is supposed to have gone through. We now have expert evidence to say, in fact, this baby was very poorly as a result of a bowel obstruction and needed specialist attention, which it did not receive, and likely surgery to save its life, but this did not happen." So it appears that the hospital is responsible for a whole catalogue of lapses. And I'm not saying that the doctors, in their rush to find somebody guilty, one person, one sinner, and then having cleared that up, everything is all right again, like in a witch trial. There would definitely have been an urge to find somebody responsible when it might not have been one person, but just a whole lot of little mistakes in a hospital that's not being run well. File on 4 also asked 5 senior clinicians to review baby C's medical notes that were made available during the trial, and all thought the child should have been in a higher level unit. Professor Colin Morley, a retired professor of neonatology from the University of Cambridge, told the BBC he believed baby C had died from natural causes. Since the verdicts of guilty were reached, many statisticians and clinicians have come forward to challenge the evidence that was presented to the jury. James Phillips, a former government science advisor for Boris Johnson, who has criticised the trial, said, "Pivotal evidence for one of the Lucy Letby murder convictions is deeply flawed, as she appears to have never met the baby at the time it was obtained." Right, well, yeah, they might have taken some more notice of the plumber, who was constantly in the unit, telling them that the sanitation of the unit was in a very dangerous state. Which, of course, any sort of germ flying around in a neonatal unit of babies in a seriously ill state, is going to cause trouble anyway. So, yeah, that's my take on the Lucy Letby trial. I'm not saying she's innocent. What I am saying is it appears to me that the evidence was presented in a very skewed way, and that, as far as I know about this one at least, that conviction is definitely not safe, and because of that, I'm not so sure about the others either. All right, till next time. You can help my channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. That's quite important. And by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels and to donation methods are in the description. But the best way you can help is simply by clicking like and notify. Thank you.